Good morning. It's Sunday, March 28, Palm Sunday. It's the final Sunday in the season of Lent, and so this is the last of my reflections I've called cross-examination. We've been looking at the cross, the suffering and dying of Jesus from a unique perspective each week, and thinking about how Jesus went to his cross as our substitute, as one who paid our ransom, one who was the ultimate sacrifice, one who is a great example of what it means to live sacrificially. And last week we considered how in his suffering and dying, Jesus sank down to the lowest parts of any experience we could ever go through and is with us in all of the deep and dark places that we inhabit. We're going to conclude on this Palm Sunday by thinking of something else that is actually a big part of Christian tradition when it comes to reflecting on the work of Christ on the cross. It's called Christus Victor, Latin for Christ the Victor, Christ the Champion. The idea here is that in his suffering and dying, Jesus conquered the powers of evil. He is the victor over Satan and the dominion of darkness. We read about this quite often in the New Testament, how as Paul puts it in Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, Jesus disarmed the powers and the authorities by his suffering and dying on the cross. And so today we're going to think especially about how it is the power of death that Jesus conquered in his dying. The line from a Christian hymn that I'm borrowing today is from an Easter hymn, "Death no longer is the stronger." What a great statement that is. By his dying, Jesus has caused death itself to die. And to focus our reflections this morning, I'd like to read this passage recorded in Hebrews chapter 2, beginning at verse 9, reading through verse 15. "But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor, because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He says, 'I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly I will sing your praises.' And again, 'I will put my trust in him.' And again he says, 'Here am I and the children God has given me.' Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death." There's a lot of references to death in those words, how Jesus died, and by his death tasted death for everyone and defeated the one who holds the power of death, taking away not only the reality and the finality of death, but even the fear of death. It's an incredible thing to think about, which is what we are engaging in our reflections this morning. We know that death is not eliminated, and it is still very frightening. It is a power and an enemy, but it has been overwhelmed by the redeeming work of Christ. Think about how Jesus, when he died on the cross, spoke these incredible words to the thief that died and was crucified next to him. "Today you will be with me in paradise." It assures us that death, while a power, while it is something frightening and painful, is not the end. God has something else in mind for us. It's not a dead end, but a gateway to something beautiful and glorious. Sometimes I think we have far too safe a view of the world. We regard the world as being friendly or comfortable for the most part. Now, maybe the pandemic has changed that way of thinking. We're reminded on a daily basis of how frightening, how deadly COVID-19 is. We have seen its comprehensive impact as literally billions of people all over the world have been affected by it, this tiny microscopic virus that is so lethal. So maybe this pandemic has enabled us in the Western world to see the world as so many others have in other parts of the world and for so much of history, where the world is regarded primarily as threatening, not a safe place at all. I remember asking somebody once, "How do you view the world?" Is it primarily a safe place with pockets of rebellion and danger and fear? Or is it fundamentally a dangerous and threatening place with places of refuge that protect you and shield you from these harsh realities of life? I have a feeling most of us would answer the way that person answered my question. The world is primarily safe and good and comfortable. We hear every day about terrible things that happen. So there are these sporadic, intermittent flare-ups of violence and death and fear. But fundamentally, the world is safe, so we think. But it's not the way that millions of people in other parts of the world view things or have for many centuries. And it's not the way the Bible would encourage us to look at the world. It's not as if the world is evil, something that we have to retreat from. It's not as if the Bible shows us that the powers of darkness are really the reigning forces that control the universe. Sometimes we may be tempted to think that's true. But the Bible teaches us that the world God made still retains much of its original goodness. We experience and celebrate that in so many ways. The Bible teaches that Jesus is the cosmic king of the universe, while his place as the supreme ruler is threatened and challenged, it can never be overthrown. But the Bible also tells us that this world, while fundamentally good, is frustrated. It has been invaded by enemy forces. It is in bondage to the powers of evil and sin and death. And this is precisely why Jesus came, to live a perfect life and to die on the cross for us, to defeat these powers that we are powerless to resist. And so this reminds us that the world really is a place of danger, a threatening place. God in his grace is present with us, and God always is and will be its true king. But the world is in bondage to powers that Christ and his death conquered. My wife and I spent much of the month of January making trips to a hospital in London, Ontario, about a 40-minute drive each way for us. We were visiting our daughter, who was a patient there, very seriously ill for much of that month. Because of COVID, only one of us could visit her, but we would both go. And as we made those trips, we noticed how many birds we saw on the way to and from the hospital. And not just sparrows and starlings. No, we saw raptors, Cooper's hawks, red-tailed hawks. We even saw some bald eagles soaring up above the Thames River on a couple of occasions. My wife, when she was home one evening, is pretty sure she saw and felt the presence of an owl that swooped close by overhead one night. Why did we see all these birds, we wondered. My wife was very encouraged by them, thinking that these birds reminded us of God's care. Jesus encouraged us to consider the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. They have important things to teach us about the love of God, how he watches us and cares for us. So we both felt comforted by the presence of these birds, thinking about how we soar on eagle's wings, as the Old Testament prophecy of Isaiah puts it. High above all our struggles and our trouble, God lifts us up on eagle's wings. The book of Exodus talks about how God carries his people out of bondage and into a place that he has in mind to bring them. I carry you on eagle's wings. So there's something beautiful about seeing these birds. They remind us of God and his love and care. And yet, as I said in one of our conversations, these are raptors. Do these ravenous beasts not also remind us of how dangerous and threatening the world could be? Are they not representatives of nature, which the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson characterized as red in tooth and claw? They do that too. And as we made our trips to the hospital to see our daughter, who was very seriously ill, we were reminded of that harsh reality too. And so both of these are simultaneously true. The world is both safe and threatening. The world is fundamentally good and yet enslaved by the powers of evil. I remembered in one of our conversations of an incident that took place when we were still living in New Jersey. My wife and I still laugh about this because we were there with our kids. They were playing soccer in the local field of the public high school. And a gentleman from the neighborhood came by with a live trap. He had trapped a chipmunk, a pesky little critter that he wanted to get rid of. He didn't want to kill the cute little thing. He caught it in a live trap and brought it to the field that day to let it go so that it could live in a new place in freedom. And as he lifted the door of that trap to let the chipmunk out, the little thing ran out, but no sooner did it enjoy its freedom, and a red-tailed hawk that was perched in a nearby tree swooped down, clutched the cute little chippy in its talons, and flew off. Certainly not the demonstration that man was hoping to present that morning, but it reminds us again of how dangerous and good the world can be simultaneously. I can imagine what that little chipmunk was thinking, if they're in fact capable of such things. Scurrying out of the cage, he must have been elated. Freedom, freedom, a whole new world. Oh no! As he looks up and sees this ravenous bird descending on him, talons first. The world is like that sometimes for us too. But the good news in all of this is that Jesus has defeated the powers of sin and of death. His dying has a lethal impact all its own. Death itself has died, so death no longer is the stronger because of the cross of Christ. Now, I want to highlight one word in the passage that we read from Hebrews 2 that really emphasizes this and shows us how this works, how we are involved in the dying of Christ. It's in verse 10, where Jesus is called the pioneer of our salvation. It's an interesting word, the Greek word archegos. Only 4 times this word is used in the New Testament, each of them in reference to Jesus. And sometimes that word is translated in different ways, as pioneer, or as author, or founder. The King James Version has it as captain. And those are all important and good words. They suggest prominence and strength and victory. But there's another way of translating that word that I think is the best way, as many commentators suggest. It's champion. Champion. It also suggests victory and strength, but something else very important. In the ancient world, military battles were sometimes fought not between armies, but between champions, strong warriors who represented that army. And the two of them would duke it out in no man's land, that space between the armies. And whichever champion won signaled a victory not only for him, but for the entire army, the kingdom that they represented. The classic example of this is David and Goliath. I reflected on that story some months ago with you in a message that I delivered in the Christmas season. Goliath was called the champion of the Philistines, and he called out for a champion to come into that empty space representing the people of Israel. David is the unlikely hero in that story, as we know. But the important thing here is that by defeating Goliath, the entire nation of Israel won a victory. No sooner is Goliath killed and the Israelites move ahead in battle formation and they rout the Philistines. Because David the champion has won, everyone wins. Now you can see why this is such an important word when we think of how Jesus and his death involves all of us. He's our champion. He represents us. He shares the spoils of his victory with all of us. He defeats the powers of death for us. And it's especially important on this Palm Sunday that we think of this, because what did Jesus do on that Palm Sunday but enter the city of Jerusalem alone? He went ahead by himself, riding on that donkey. On that battlefield, he went in our place as our champion. By his dying, death has died. Our dying is no longer the final reality for our lives. And this is why the author of Hebrews in chapter 2 quotes those Old Testament passages. Psalm 22, a messianic psalm that expresses the anguish and suffering that Jesus experienced, and Isaiah chapter 8. Both of these quotes are rendered in such a way that they are now put into the mouth of Jesus as he speaks and sings the praises of God. I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly I will sing your praises. And then here am I from Isaiah 8, and the children God has given me. Why is this so important? Because Jesus is not only celebrating his own victory by defeating the powers of evil on his cross, He is celebrating how there is a great assembly, brothers and sisters and children of God who are reclaimed, who are directly involved in the work that he did for us. And so both of these passages highlight how Jesus, as our champion, suffered and struggled and died and rose again and shared the victory of all of that with us, so much so that in his death, our death is also defeated. We are children reclaimed by the work of God. We are part of a great assembly that Jesus is pleased to present to the Father, our Father, because of his work. Notice that Jesus doesn't just take pride and joy in his own victory. As important as that is, his ultimate joy is seeing others share it. And this is what just emphasizes the grace of the gospel, how Jesus did this for us, how he went alone on our behalf, how he fought enemy forces that we are powerless to defend ourselves against, and delights in the victory that is ours because of him. I want you to know that Jesus has done this for you, that you too are one of the many that he suffered and died and rose for, that the victory he won is one he shares with you. He did this by going under the powers of evil. There's an important line in the Apostles' Creed that refers to how Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. He submitted himself to the powers of this world. He went under these powers and by so doing defeated them. This is why it's such an incredible thing to believe that the work of Jesus Christ impacts our lives directly and eternally, that in his dying, our dying has also been defeated. He does all the work and we get all the benefits. There's something about that King James version of the word archegos, translated as captain, that is interesting to me, because it suggests something that I'm sure many of us remember in our playground days at school. When we would form teams, there would be two captains who would choose people to be on their teams. I remember that for softball or road hockey games that took place. I was always chosen somewhere in the middle, definitely not among the first, the most capable, the most athletic. And didn't you always feel bad for the ones who were chosen very last? Didn't you feel bad for those ones who were left till the very end? Jesus is a much better captain. He doesn't choose people based on credentials or potential or strength. No, he chooses us all for the very same reason, because he simply delights to do that, because he loves to do that. Jesus calls your name, not because of who you are or what you are capable of, but because he is our champion, who in his grace and by his power defeats enemy powers for us. And he delights in knowing that you are a part of that. And I hope you know that you are. I hope that you know, in spite of all of the harsh realities of life, all of our struggling and crying and doubting and dying, that in all of that we can also be assured that Christ is ours and we are his. The famous words of Frederick Buechner in his book Wishful Thinking convey it beautifully. It's as if God is saying to us, here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen, but don't be afraid. I am with you. Nothing can ever separate us. It's for you I created the universe. I love you. Those are pure gospel words. And I hope that you know that those are words that are spoken to you, that Jesus delights in singing the praise of knowing that you are part of that great assembly. For you he died, and for you he conquered death. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it has been encouraging to you. I hope all of these messages of cross-examination have enabled you to have a fresh and wonderful sense of who Jesus is and why he died for you. I look forward to celebrating the message of Easter, the victory of life with you next Sunday. Be well and be blessed.